Yes. You want to shoot me? Go ahead and pull the trigger.
The sun was setting low over the neat rows of fancy houses, casting long shadows over the private road that led to our new neighborhood. It should have been a peaceful evening. Families were out walking their dogs, kids riding bikes, and the smell of barbecue drifted lazily through the warm air. I was just pulling the last box out of the back of our pickup truck when it happened. I heard a loud bang, like someone had slammed a car door hard, and then angry shouting. I turned my head fast and saw the HOA security guard, a stocky guy in a black uniform with a shiny badge on his chest, stomping toward my daughter. And he was pointing a gun at her. Not a taser. Not pepper spray. A real deadly handgun. "Get on the ground now," he barked, his voice full of rage and panic. My heart slammed into my ribs so hard I couldn't even breathe. Everything around me seemed to freeze, the sounds fading into a terrifying silence. My daughter, Grace, didn't even flinch. Instead, she slowly turned her head and locked eyes with him, her body completely still, her face calm like she was bored. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run and shield her. But before I could move, she spoke in a voice I barely recognized, low, hard, and full of authority. "You don't want to do this." The man's hand shook on the trigger. I swear for a second I thought she was going to get shot right there, 5 feet from our driveway. But then something happened that made everything spiral into total chaos. Let me rewind a little. My name's David Monroe. I'm 58 years old, a retired firefighter, and after nearly 3 decades of hard work, I finally bought my dream home. A beautiful ranch-style house with a wraparound porch in a quiet gated community just outside of Dallas, Texas. The place was supposed to be a fresh start for me, my wife Sarah, and our daughter Grace. Now about Grace. She's not your average 28-year-old. Sure, she looks like your typical American girl next door, strawberry blonde hair, deep blue eyes, about 5 feet 7 inches. Always smiling, always polite. She wears jeans, sneakers, and usually a Dallas Cowboys cap when she's off duty. But Grace isn't just any woman. She's an elite FBI strike commander, trained in tactical operations, undercover missions, hostage negotiations. The whole 9 yards. Of course, around here no one knew that. We wanted it that way. Grace had just transferred back to the Dallas field office after years of dangerous missions abroad, and we thought moving into a quiet neighborhood would help her ease back into normal life. Boy, were we wrong. From the moment we moved in, something felt off. The HOA here was different from anything I had ever seen. Sure, most HOAs are strict about lawn height and mailbox colors. But here? They had actual security patrols, guys in fake-looking uniforms riding around on golf carts acting like they were secret agents. At first I thought it was just for show. You know, some bored retirees playing tough guy. But then they started harassing us over petty stuff. You need special permission to park a pickup truck overnight. Your daughter's clothing isn't in line with the community dress standards. We saw you unloading furniture without prior notice. It was ridiculous. And it got worse fast. 3 days after moving in, I found a note stuffed under our door. Comply with HOA rules or leave. You've been warned. It wasn't signed. There were no official HOA letterheads. Just typed words on cheap printer paper. My wife Sarah wanted to call the cops immediately. I told her not to. It's probably just some busybody with too much time on their hands, I said. I should have listened to her gut. Because the next day it wasn't a note. It was the so-called HOA security patrol, banging on our door at 7 a.m., claiming that Grace looked suspicious because she jogged wearing a hoodie and sunglasses. It was clear they were targeting her. And that made Grace very uneasy. She wasn't scared, she never is, but she was cautious. She even joked that she'd rather do another high-risk raid overseas than deal with petty neighborhood politics. I should have taken the warning more seriously. The night before the gun incident, I noticed 2 different security guys parked outside our house. Sitting in their golf carts. Taking pictures. Whispering into radios. Grace saw them too. She laughed and said, if they knew who they were spying on, they'd wet their pants. We sat on the porch with a couple of beers and talked about life, her missions, all the things she'd seen. The good, the bad, and the downright terrifying. I asked her if she regretted anything. She looked at me and said, Dad, I don't regret protecting people. Not once. I just regret when people mistake kindness for weakness. At the time I thought it was just a deep, passing thought. I didn't realize she was preparing herself for what was about to happen. The morning had been peaceful. Sunny skies. Birds singing. Normal moving chaos. Sarah was setting up the kitchen. I was outside unloading boxes. Grace was organizing some gear in the garage. That's when the security cart pulled up again. Only this time it wasn't just a guy with a clipboard. It was Officer James Jimmy Larkin. Big, loud, and loved by the HOA board for being aggressive and thorough. He wasn't a real cop, he had no police powers, but he carried himself like he was the sheriff of the Wild West. Today he had something else strapped to his hip. A black, polished handgun. He climbed out of his cart and immediately zeroed in on Grace, who was walking back to the truck with a box in her arms. And for reasons I still don't understand, he started shouting. Accusing her of trespassing. Of acting suspicious. Of being a threat to the community. Grace tried to calm him down. She put the box down slowly. She showed her empty hands. But it wasn't enough. Jimmy drew his gun, cocked it, and pointed it straight at her head. There we were. The so-called security guard, shaking with rage, the gun aimed at my little girl, who just happened to be trained better than any SWAT officer in the state. Grace didn't blink. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't back down. She didn't scream or cry. Instead, in one smooth motion, she tilted her head, smiled slightly, and said just loud enough for him, and for me, to hear. You have exactly 3 seconds to lower your weapon, or you're going to prison today. Jimmy's face twisted with confusion. You're bluffing, he spat. 1 second passed. 2 seconds. Suddenly, sirens exploded down the street, screaming louder and louder, flashing lights bouncing off every window. 3 black SUVs whipped around the corner, tires screeching. And from them poured a team of heavily armed, real federal agents, badges flashing, guns drawn, surrounding Jimmy in seconds. The color drained from his face. Grace didn't even move. She just smiled wider and said, "Guess who you just pointed a gun at, genius?" Jimmy, the so-called HOA security guard, stood frozen. The sirens wailed louder. The bright flashing lights of the federal SUVs bathed the entire street in a dizzying mix of red and blue. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. Dogs barked. Car alarms went off. And Jimmy? His gun hand shook violently as he looked around like a trapped animal. Then came the sound, the unmistakable metallic clack-clack of real guns being cocked. Drop your weapon. Hands up. Now. Several federal agents rushed forward, their vests clearly marked FBI in big, bold letters. Their faces were stone cold, professionals who had seen real danger, real criminals. Jimmy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked at Grace, then back at the agents. Still, for one stupid second he thought about fighting it. He tightened his grip on his gun. That's when Grace moved. And it was lightning fast. In a single fluid motion she grabbed his wrist, twisted it sharply, and pop! The gun fell to the ground. She kicked it away without even glancing at it and slammed Jimmy face first onto the pavement. The thud echoed down the whole street. Jimmy screamed. Grace planted her knee on his back, pulled his arms behind him, and snapped a pair of FBI-issued handcuffs onto his wrists like it was second nature. All in about 5 seconds. The lead agent, a tall African-American man named Agent Reed, jogged up with his team. He grinned down at Jimmy, who was now whimpering like a scalded dog. Well, Reed said. Assaulting an FBI strike commander. Good job, tough guy. Jimmy gasped. What? I didn't know. She didn't say she was FBI. Grace leaned down, her mouth close to his ear, and said so calmly it sent chills up my spine. Ignorance isn't a defense, Jimmy. As Grace stood up, brushing off her jeans, I realized the whole neighborhood was slowly gathering around, a curious, whispering crowd forming in our front yard. Mr. Peterson from next door holding his tiny poodle. Mrs. Anderson across the street, peeking behind her SUV. Even that grumpy old man, Mr. Biggs, who had complained about our moving truck, came hobbling over. Everyone was murmuring. What's going on? Is that a real FBI arrest? Who got busted? Somewhere in the crowd, a woman gasped loudly, "Oh my gosh, that's Jimmy. He's always been a hothead." Another neighbor chimed in, "Told y'all. That man was gonna snap one day." It was a full-blown scene. Grace ignored them. She spoke quietly to Agent Reed, briefing him on everything. Jimmy's threats, the fake authority, the gun, the HOA harassment. Meanwhile, Jimmy kept shouting nonsense. I was doing my job. She looked suspicious. I didn't know she was FBI. But no one was listening. Especially not the federal agents. They lifted him off the ground roughly and shoved him toward one of the black SUVs. And just when I thought things couldn't get crazier, a shiny black Mercedes screeched to a stop down the street. Out hopped a tall, skinny woman in a pearl-white suit, with perfectly styled silver hair and a clipboard in her hand. It was Patricia Holloway, the president of the HOA. She stormed up, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement. "What is the meaning of this?" she screeched. "You can't just storm into our community like thugs. This is private property." Agent Reed didn't even blink. He held up his badge so close to her face she had to lean back. "Federal jurisdiction, ma'am," he said. "And your HOA security guard just committed a felony." Patricia's mouth flapped uselessly for a moment. Then she tried to turn the tables. "This woman." She pointed a manicured finger at Grace. "She doesn't belong here. She's been suspicious since the day she moved in." Grace raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. She didn't say a word. Agent Reed stepped closer to Patricia, his voice hard as steel. "Ma'am, are you saying you ordered Mr. Larkin to harass these residents?" Patricia blanched. "No. I mean, we have standards, rules. We can't just let anyone like a federal officer protecting your neighborhood from real threats." Reed cut her off sharply. The crowd murmured louder now, some gasping, some shaking their heads in disgust at Patricia. You could see it in her eyes, the instant she realized she wasn't the one in control anymore. Agent Reed pulled a sheet of paper from a file folder. "Funny you should mention rules, ma'am. Because we happen to have a federal arrest warrant for Jimmy Larkin. And an ongoing investigation into your entire HOA board for harassment, unlawful discrimination, and possible racketeering." The color drained from Patricia's face so fast I thought she might faint. What? "No. That's ridiculous. I didn't." Reed smiled thinly. "Save it for the lawyers, ma'am." He nodded at one of the female agents standing nearby. "Read her rights." Patricia shrieked as the agent grabbed her wrists and began handcuffing her right there in front of everyone. The crowd erupted into whispers and gasps. Someone even pulled out a phone and started recording. Mr. Biggs muttered, finally, "About time." As the feds packed Patricia and Jimmy into different SUVs, Grace finally turned to me. For the first time that day she looked a little tired. Not scared. Not angry. Just tired. I rushed over and hugged her tight. "You okay?" I whispered. She nodded against my shoulder. "Yeah, Dad. This isn't the first time I've had a gun in my face." That broke my heart a little. She pulled back and smiled. "But it's the first time it happened at home." We stood there for a moment in the middle of the mess, just breathing. The federal agents started clearing out. The neighbors slowly returned to their homes, buzzing with gossip. The sun had dipped even lower, painting the sky in soft purples and golds. It felt like it should have been the end of the madness. But deep down I knew better. Because the look in Agent Reed's eyes when he spoke to Grace, it wasn't just relief. It was a warning. Something bigger was coming. Something worse than one rogue security guard and a nosy HOA president. And whatever it was coming for us next. That night, after the flashing lights disappeared and the crowd went back to their homes, our house finally went quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like something bad is still hiding around the corner. Sarah, my wife, was inside, pacing back and forth in the living room. She had locked every door, checked every window twice, and was now peeking nervously through the curtains every few minutes. Grace sat at the kitchen table, her baseball cap pulled low over her face, staring at her untouched cup of coffee. Me. I was sitting on the couch, trying to process everything that had just happened. Jimmy was arrested. Patricia was arrested. Our neighbors are recording videos, whispering, gossiping. And worst of all, the way Agent Reed had looked at Grace before he left. It wasn't just, "Thank you for your service." It was more like, "Be ready." Around midnight, just when we thought it was safe to go to bed, there was a knock at the door. Bam, bam, bam. We all jumped. Sarah gasped and clutched my arm. Grace stood up calmly, reaching into her jacket, and pulling out a slim black pistol she kept hidden under her belt. I moved toward the door carefully. "Who is it?" I called out, trying not to sound as scared as I felt. "It's Agent Reed," came the reply, firm and serious. "We need to talk." I cracked the door open, just enough to see his badge again. Relieved, I opened it fully and let him inside. But the look on his face immediately made my stomach drop. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't relaxed. Something was very, very wrong. Agent Reed sat us down at the kitchen table, right under the bright overhead light. He leaned forward and said in a low voice, "We didn't just come today because of the gun incident. That was just the excuse." Grace's eyes narrowed. "What's really going on?" Reed glanced around, making sure no one was listening through the windows. Then he pulled out a thick brown envelope from inside his jacket. He slid it across the table toward Grace. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Grainy black and white shots taken from surveillance cameras. Some inside office buildings, some in parking garages, some even in restaurants. And in every single photo? Grace. Sarah gasped and covered her mouth. I felt sick. Someone had been following Grace for months. Reed tapped the photos. We believe your HOA, and possibly outside parties, have been collecting intel on you. Watching your movements. Tracking you. Grace stayed completely still. Who? She asked, her voice flat. Reed shook his head. We're still digging. But the way they operated, it's not amateur. This is serious, organized, and dangerous. He looked me and Sarah in the eye. You were never random targets. They wanted Grace. Specifically. The room felt colder all of a sudden. Sarah whispered, why? She's just an FBI agent. Grace smiled grimly. Not just any agent, Mom. I led raids that dismantled major crime networks. I sent some very bad people to prison. And some, Reed said quietly, might want payback. Reed pulled out a small device, a white noise generator, and placed it on the table. We're not safe talking here, he said. There might be bugs. He scribbled a note on a scrap of paper. Meet me at the old train depot tomorrow. 4 p.m. Don't tell anyone. Come alone. Then, without another word, he slipped out the door and disappeared into the night. We sat there stunned. Grace picked up the photos again, flipping through them slowly. Sarah wiped away tears. I stared at the closed door, heart pounding. What had we gotten ourselves into? The next morning, while Sarah cooked breakfast and Grace went for a jog, she needed to clear her head, I decided to poke around a little. I grabbed my toolbox and headed outside, pretending to fix a loose panel on the side of the house. But what I was really doing was checking for anything weird. Hidden cameras. Wires. Anything. For about 30 minutes I found nothing. Until I reached the backyard fence. There, tucked under a loose plank, I saw something shiny. I pulled it out carefully. It was a tiny black device, no bigger than a matchbox, with a blinking red light. A listening device. My blood went cold. We were being watched. And not just watched, listened to. I yanked the device loose and shoved it into my pocket. I had to show Grace. Immediately. But just as I turned to head inside, I heard it. Crunch. The sound of a boot on gravel. I froze. Slowly I turned my head. And there, standing at the edge of the woods behind our house, was a figure. Dressed head to toe in black. Face hidden under a black ski mask. Gloved hands holding something small and metallic. Watching me. For one heartbeat we just stared at each other. Then, the figure turned and ran into the trees. Without thinking, I bolted after him. I crashed through the underbrush, twigs slapping my arms and legs, adrenaline pounding through my veins. Hey! I shouted. Stop! But the guy was fast. He darted through the trees like he knew the land by heart. Still, I wasn't some weak old man. I was a retired firefighter, and I'd spent plenty of time chasing people out of burning buildings. I pushed myself harder, faster. Branches scratched my face. Rocks tore at my boots. I didn't care. I had to catch him. Had to find out who was spying on my family. The figure glanced back just once and I saw a flash of his eyes through the mask. Cold, empty, hateful. I was gaining on him when he suddenly skidded to a stop near a clearing. For a second I thought he had given up. But then he threw something on the ground. And smoke exploded everywhere. Thick, choking gray smoke that filled my lungs and burned my eyes. I coughed and stumbled, trying to see through the swirling fog. I heard footsteps, more than one, running off in different directions. It wasn't just one guy. There were multiple people hiding in the woods behind our house. And they had just set a trap. Gasping, I stumbled back toward the house. My shirt was torn. My hands were bleeding. And worse, I had no idea how many people were out there, or what they were planning next. I burst through the back door. Sarah screamed when she saw me. Grace came running in from the garage, dropping her water bottle. Dad, she shouted. What happened? I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me. There's more than one, I panted. They're watching us. Planning something. Grace's face turned hard. All that calmness she had before? Gone. She looked like a warrior preparing for battle. She reached under the kitchen sink, pulled out a hidden tactical bag and started loading weapons and gear. Sarah was crying now. I sat down heavily at the table, clutching the tiny listening device still in my pocket. The storm we thought we had survived? It was only just beginning. The next day came with thick, heavy clouds hanging low over the town. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Grace spent most of the morning preparing. She cleaned her weapons, checked her gear, made phone calls in hushed tones. Every move was calm, focused, precise, like a soldier getting ready for war. Sarah couldn't sit still. She kept cleaning the already spotless kitchen, folding towels, wiping counters, anything to keep her hands busy. Her eyes were red from crying. And me? I sat on the porch, shotgun across my lap, scanning the treeline for any signs of movement. No way was I going to let someone sneak up on us again. At exactly 3:30 p.m., Grace stood up and strapped on her bulletproof vest under a loose black hoodie. She adjusted her baseball cap low over her face and tucked a small pistol into her waistband. Then she kissed Sarah on the forehead and hugged me tight. "I'll be back," she promised. And with that, she slipped out the door and into our pickup truck, heading for the old train depot on the edge of town. The place looked abandoned. Rusty tracks, broken windows, peeling paint on the old metal building. A faded sign dangled from a chain overhead. Dallas Freight Station, ST 1928. Grace pulled up slowly, parking the truck where she could still see the road. She scanned the area carefully. No cars. No people. Just a couple of tumbleweeds blowing across the cracked asphalt. At exactly 4 p.m., a black SUV rolled into the lot and parked across from her. Agent Reed stepped out, alone. He wore jeans, boots, and a dark jacket. No obvious gear, no backup. He raised a hand casually, showing he wasn't armed. Grace got out too, keeping her hands visible. They met halfway across the lot, the crunch of gravel loud in the dead silence. "You sure you weren't followed?" Grace asked immediately. Reed nodded. "Check twice. We're clear." But Grace's instincts were sharper than most. Her eyes scanned the rooftops, the shadows, the rusting train cars beyond the fence. Something felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. And then she saw it. Movement. A glint of metal. On the roof of the depot. Sniper. Grace shoved Reed hard, knocking him off balance just as crack. A gunshot rang out. The bullet zipped past, missing his head by inches. Ambush. Grace shouted, pulling her weapon as she dragged Reed behind a rusted-out truck. More shots echoed through the air. 3? No, for shooters at least, surrounding the depot. Reed swore under his breath. "How the hell?" "We were set up." Grace barked. "They knew we'd meet." Another bullet ricocheted off the truck's fender, showering them in sparks. Reed pulled his own weapon now, crouching low. "We need to move," he shouted over the gunfire. Grace nodded, her mind racing. Whoever these people were, they weren't amateurs. They moved with military precision, laying down cover fire, trying to herd them into the open. This wasn't a warning. It was an assassination attempt. Grace took a deep breath. She wasn't just a fighter, she was a commander. "Cover me," she yelled to Reed. Then she sprinted, low and fast, weaving between broken-down train cars and busted crates. Bullets whipped past her. She didn't stop. She didn't slow. She climbed up a half-collapsed scaffolding, swinging onto a second-story ledge with the agility of a gymnast. From there she had a better angle. She saw the shooters clearly now. One on the depot roof with a sniper rifle. Two behind abandoned shipping containers. Another circling wide with a shotgun. Grace took aim. Pop, pop. 2 quick shots. One man dropped behind the container, clutching his leg, screaming. The others shouted in alarm. Grace used the distraction to vault over the ledge and close in fast. Back at the house, Sarah and I sat glued to the police scanner. We heard it all. Shots fired at an old freight depot. Multiple assailants. Possible agent under fire. Sarah broke down crying. I gripped the armrest so hard my knuckles turned white. "Come on, baby girl," I whispered. "Come home safe." At the depot, Reed managed to take out another attacker with a well-aimed shot to the shoulder. But there were more coming. A black SUV roared into the lot, tires squealing. 4 more masked men jumped out, armed to the teeth. Grace gritted her teeth. It wasn't just random thugs. It was a coordinated hit team. And she was their main target. She ducked behind a pillar as bullets smashed into the concrete above her head. Reed was pinned down behind the truck, low on ammo. They couldn't hold out much longer. Grace's mind raced. There was only one chance. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to Reed. "Cover fire, I'm going to the tower." The depot had an old observation tower high above the tracks. If she could get up there, she could pick off the attackers one by one. Or at least buy enough time for backup to arrive, if anyone was coming. She signaled to Reed with a quick hand gesture. 3, 2, 1. Reed popped up and fired wildly, forcing the attackers to duck. Grace sprinted across the lot, dodging bullets, her boots pounding the cracked pavement. She reached the rusted stairwell and began climbing 2 steps at a time. Behind her, the attackers realized what she was doing. One of them shouted, "Get her." Grace reached the top of the tower, gasping for air. The view was dizzying. She could see the whole depot, the dusty fields beyond, even the tiny dots of houses far in the distance. But there was no time to enjoy it. The attackers were coming. Fast. She took position behind an old metal beam and waited. The first man charged up the stairs. Grace shot him in the leg. He collapsed howling. Another tried to climb the side of the tower. Grace kicked his hand off the ledge, sending him crashing down. But they were relentless. One by one they came. And Grace fought them all. Every shot was precise. Every move was calculated. But even the best warriors get tired. And Grace was running out of ammo. Just when it seemed like she might survive. Just when she thought she could outlast them. A figure appeared at the bottom of the stairs. A figure she recognized. It was someone she trusted. Someone she never thought would betray her. And he was pointing a gun straight at her heart. Grace froze. Her heartbeat slammed in her ears louder than the gunfire. At the bottom of the stairs stood Agent Reed. The same Agent Reed who had warned her. The same one who promised to protect her. But now he wasn't holding out a badge. He wasn't shouting orders. He was aiming a pistol straight at her chest. "Drop your weapon, Grace," Reed said coolly, like he was ordering a coffee. Grace's mouth went dry. "You," she said, barely above a whisper. Reed smiled, a cold, bitter smile. "Should have stayed overseas, Commander Monroe," he sneered. "You made too many enemies." Grace didn't lower her weapon. Even with exhaustion burning through her arms, even knowing she was outnumbered, she kept her gun steady. "Why, Reed?" she asked. He shrugged like it was obvious. "Because you embarrassed the wrong people. You ruined operations worth billions. You took down men who had friends in very high places." Grace narrowed her eyes. "The HOA was a cover?" Reed chuckled darkly. "The HOA? Just useful idiots. Jimmy, Patricia. They had no clue they were pawns. We used them to keep you distracted, watching you, testing your reactions." He stepped closer, gun still aimed at her heart. "You were supposed to fold. Get scared. Run. But you didn't. You fought back." He shook his head like she had disappointed him personally. "And now you have to disappear." Grace's mind raced. She was down to her last bullet. There were still shooters below. Reed had the high ground at the base of the tower. If she moved wrong, if she hesitated even 1 second, it would be over. And worse, if she died, Reed would come after her family next. Sarah. Me. Everyone she loved. She had to think fast. She had to do something crazy. Grace lowered her weapon slightly, just enough to make it look like she was surrendering. "Okay," she said quietly. "You win." Reed smirked. He took 2 steps up the stairs, closing the distance. "Smart girl," he said, lifting his gun higher. "Now drop it." Grace let the gun slip from her hand. It clattered onto the metal platform. Reed relaxed just a fraction. And in that tiny fraction of a second, Grace moved. She kicked the gun back up into her hand with her boot, a move she had practiced hundreds of times during tactical drills, and fired her last bullet straight at the railing above Reed's head. The bullet hit the rusted beam with a loud ping. Chunks of rust and metal showered down. Reed instinctively ducked, throwing his hands over his face. Grace didn't wait. She lunged forward, grabbed the railing, swung herself over, and dropped down to the lower landing in a heart-stopping move. Pain exploded in her knees as she landed hard, but she kept moving, snatching Reed's wrist before he could react. With a brutal twist, she forced the gun from his hand. They wrestled, crashing into the metal stairs. Fists. Elbows. Grunts. It was dirty, ugly fighting. Reed was bigger, heavier. But Grace had something more powerful. Rage. And something to protect. They struggled for control. Reed threw a punch that split Grace's lip. Grace kneed him in the ribs hard enough to hear something crack. He stumbled back, gasping. Grace grabbed a loose pipe lying on the stairs and swung it like a baseball bat. Crack. It connected with Reed's shoulder, sending him sprawling. But before she could land a second blow, gunfire erupted again from below. The other attackers had realized something was wrong. Bullets zinged through the metal beams. Grace ducked, dragging Reed by his jacket behind a support pillar. She didn't have time to finish the fight. She needed to escape, now. She searched Reed's pockets quickly and found a second phone. Unlocked. Already open to a message thread. She scanned the latest texts. And what she read made her blood run cold. The messages weren't just about her. They were about me. About my wife Sarah. About our home. The text said, "If she survives, Plan B, eliminate the parents. Make it look like an accident. Send a message." Grace's hand shook. Her parents were next. and the kill team might already be moving. She looked at the writhing Reed at her feet, then out at the abandoned tracks. She didn't have time for a proper arrest. Didn't have time for backup. She had to save her family. Even if it meant leaving Reed alive, for now. She picked up her dropped pistol, shoved it into her waistband and sprinted toward the parking lot. Bullets chased her. Voices shouted behind her. But she didn't stop. She didn't look back. She leaped into her truck, tires screeching as she floored it out of the lot. The town blurred by in a haze of speed and fear. Her hands gripped the wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. She called 911, no answer. Jam. Maybe blocked. She tried Agent Reed's FBI number, dead. Whoever these people were, they had more power than she had imagined. They had connections inside law enforcement. They could make calls disappear. Dispatches vanish. Maybe even stall first responders. She was on her own. The only thing that mattered now was getting home, fast. Saving us before it was too late. Meanwhile, Sarah and I were still inside, completely unaware of what was racing toward us. I had just started feeling a little calmer after hearing police sirens earlier when something made me glance out the front window. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But then I saw them. 3 black SUVs. Pulling into our driveway. Fast. Doors opening. Men in tactical gear pouring out. And they weren't there to talk. They were there to kill. The black SUVs screeched to a halt in front of our house, kicking up clouds of dust. Before Sarah or I could even react, 4 men in full tactical gear jumped out, rifles slung across their chests. Their faces were hidden behind black masks. They moved fast, surrounding the house like wolves closing in on a wounded animal. Sarah grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with terror. "What do we do?" she gasped. I didn't even hesitate. I reached under the couch cushion and yanked out the old Remington shotgun I kept hidden for emergencies. "Get in the pantry," I told her, shoving her toward the kitchen. "Lock the door. Don't come out no matter what you hear." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face, and disappeared into the pantry. I pumped the shotgun, the sound filling the room with a heavy clack-clack. My hands shook, but not with fear. With fury. No one was taking my family without a fight. The first man kicked open the front door with a loud crash. He barely had time to step inside before I pulled the trigger. Boom. The shotgun blast knocked him flat on his back, sending his weapon skidding across the hardwood floor. The others hesitated outside, not expecting resistance. That gave me precious seconds. I slammed the door shut and dragged a heavy bookcase in front of it, buying us a little more time. I heard angry shouting outside. They weren't going to stop. They wanted us dead. As I scrambled to reload, I heard a new sound. An engine, roaring closer, faster, like a wild animal tearing across the road. Then, crash. Grace's pickup truck smashed through our side fence and skidded to a halt on the lawn. Before the attackers could react, Grace was out, moving like a blur. She fired 2 precise shots, pop, pop, hitting the tires of one of the SUVs, trapping them. Then she took cover behind the truck and fired again, forcing the attackers to scatter. "Dad. Get down," she shouted. I hit the floor just as bullets ripped through the living room windows. Glass exploded everywhere. Chaos exploded all around us. Gunfire. Screams. The roar of engines as the attackers tried to regroup. But Grace wasn't letting them. She moved like lightning, picking off the attackers one by one. One tried to run behind the barn. Bam! Grace nailed his leg. Another tried to flank her from the side. She ducked and shot him square in the chest, his bulletproof vest saving his life but knocking him out cold. Inside the house, I did my best to help. Every time someone tried to breach the door, I fired through it. My hands ached from the recoil. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would explode. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not until Grace and Sarah were safe. Just when it seemed like we were winning, a 5th SUV screeched up the driveway. More men. Heavier weapons. And standing among them, Patricia Holloway. The HOA president. She wasn't arrested after all. Or maybe she had been released. Either way, she was back. And she was angrier than ever. She stood in the middle of the chaos, screaming orders like a general. "Take them down. Burn the house if you have to. No witnesses." I couldn't believe it. All this, the harassment, the threats, the spying, it wasn't just personal hatred. It was planned. Patricia and her powerful friends had turned the entire HOA into a front for organized crime. And we had stumbled into the middle of it. Grace saw her too. Her eyes narrowed. No fear. No hesitation. Only determination. She knew this was it. The final battle. She loaded a fresh magazine into her pistol, adjusted her stance and sprinted toward the front of the house. Bullets chased her. Shouts filled the air. But she didn't stop. She ducked, rolled, and came up firing. Pop, pop, pop. 3 more attackers went down. She moved like a ghost, impossible to hit, impossible to catch. I watched, awestruck, as my daughter, my little girl, took on an army and didn't back down. Grace finally made it to the porch where Patricia was barking orders. She slammed into Patricia, knocking the older woman off her feet. Patricia screamed, swinging her clipboard like it was a weapon. Grace twisted her arm behind her back and shoved her face first into the dirt. "You're done," Grace growled. Patricia shrieked like a banshee. "You can't do this. I have friends, powerful friends. You'll be ruined." Grace leaned closer. "Lady, I am a powerful friend." Just then, more sirens. Real ones this time. Red and blue lights flashing down the road. Dozens of real police cars, sheriff trucks, even 2 armored SWAT vehicles came roaring toward the ranch. The cavalry had arrived. Grace stood up slowly, gun still trained on Patricia. The rest of the attackers dropped their weapons and surrendered. One by one they were handcuffed, dragged away, or shoved into the back of police cruisers. Hours later, after statements were given, wounds were patched up, and the sun started to rise again. Grace, Sarah, and I sat on the porch together. Battered, exhausted, alive. Sarah leaned her head against my shoulder, tears finally drying on her cheeks. Grace sat across from us, sipping a bottle of water, her lips split, her knuckles bruised. "You saved us," I said hoarsely. Grace smiled faintly. "You saved yourselves," she said. "I just evened the odds." I looked out at the ranch, our ranch, scarred but still standing. And I realized something. We weren't just survivors. We were a family. Stronger than any HOA. Stronger than any criminals. Stronger than any betrayal. Because when you have something worth fighting for, you don't run. You stand. And you win.